Hello friends, Paper Historian here. I'm glad to welcome you to my channel, where we don't just tell stories, we take you behind the walls you were never supposed to see. Tonight's tale begins in China, in the shadow of emperors and jade halls, where boys from villages and alleys were turned into something half man, half shadow, all servant. You'll walk in the shoes of a eunuch, cut as a child, sent to the forbidden city, drilled into silence, and taught that invisibility is the first step to power. You'll scrub floors, guard secrets, pour tea for concubines, and discover that even without sons, you can bend empires. But you'll also learn the truth. In the palace, every rise comes with a knife hanging above your head, so settle in. Because this is not just the story of service, it's the story of how survival itself became a career. You are not born for the palace, you are born for the fields, for the stall, for the alley. The Forbidden City doesn't recruit from academies, it recruits from hunger. In your village, the tax grain leaves before the good harvest comes. In the market, your father's stall has more dust than customers. In the alley, the winter wind blows through patched jackets, and in all those places, rumors move faster than rice. A boy without branches and leaves can enter the emperor's service. A boy made safe can live inside red walls where there is always hot water and always a bowl of millet. Nobody says the word safe out loud. Everybody understands it means cut. Sometimes the choice is poverty's arithmetic. Your mother looks at the pot and counts. 1 son sacrificed, 3 mouths saved. Your father remembers the rent grain he cannot pay this spring and thinks of the tax clerk's sour smile. A relative who once served in Beijing swears a castrated boy, if he is quick, quiet, obedient, can find a path to steady bowls and warm roofs. He may even send home coins wrapped in silk. So they sell you. No contract with ink and witnesses, just a handshake in a tea shop, a bundle of coins heavy in a calloused palm, and you being told to be brave, to be a filial son, to be grateful. You are 9. You try to be all 3. Sometimes it is punishment. Bandits captured in a sweep, petty thieves caught too often, unlucky boys taken in a sweep to fill quotas. Castration appears in dynastic codes as both mutilation and remaking. In one breath, you are condemned. In the next, you are recruited. A magistrate who prefers usefulness to gallows hands you to a broker. Let the palace have him. Your crime becomes a career, your body becomes the receipt. Sometimes it is a kind of ambition, the bitter sort poor families specialize in. He will have no sons of his own, your uncle whispers, so he will put nephews forward, he will remember who sent him. A humbler version of the examination dream. Since your letters are weak, your body becomes your tribute. Families too far from talent and too close to hunger gamble on the knife. And sometimes it is accident wrapped in fate. You fall astride a fence post or under a cartwheel. The injury mangles what makes a man, and a healer in the next ward says quietly, "There is still a place for such boys." The world pivots. What was tragedy becomes qualification. Whatever the path, it narrows to the same door, a room that smells of hot water, sour wine, iron. The men who meet you are not physicians in scholars' robes. They are specialists with tough hands and calm voices, members of a caste who make their living at the knife. In some eras, they are independent brokers who sell boys to palace supply offices. In others, they work under licenses. Their names entered in registers, their fees grudgingly standardized. So much for the operation, so much for the certificate, so much for the ointment. They tell you, and you pretend to understand, if you cannot urinate after the binding, you will die. If the wound turns black, you will die. If fever takes you, you will die. You say you will not die. You lie with your eyes because what else can a boy do? The ritual is practical, not reverent. They soak rags in hot wine. They press your thighs with cords to slow the blood. They talk to you the way teamsters talk to oxen. Steady, steady, good boy, do not shame your mother by screaming too loud. The knife is bright because bright knives cut truer. The cut is one, and then another, and then a fire that eats your breath. Sound narrows to the river in your ears. Someone says, bucket. Someone else says, basin. You learn that blood has a smell. They bind you. They push a reed or a goose quill into the urethra so the channel will not seal shut. They pack the wound with herbs whose names you will remember as long as you live. They give you a jar, rough clay, stoppered with wax. Inside, wrapped in oiled paper, lies what they took. Some call it your treasure, a word chosen because it feels kinder than the truth. They tell you, keep it safe. One day, if fortune smiles, you will be buried with it and your soul will be whole in the next world. If fortune does not smile, the jar will be your only heirloom. The next days are a test the Empire does not bother to record. The palace does not tally how many boys fail here. The ledger begins only with survivors. You lie on straw, you watch your own belly heave, you count drips of water in the eaves, you groan in a whisper because loud groans leak strength. The first urine is a victory, like a coronation. It burns like iron. You weep and grin. When fever comes, it is a furnace whose bellows you do not control. Some boys break under it, a few slip into a grey quiet and do not wake. You learn from their stillness what duty the living owe the dead, none. This is a road with no tracks back. When you can stand, you are shaved. Not just the head, later that will be the court fashion, but now the scalp to keep lice from colonizing a wound's misery. They wash you in hot water that scalds, hand you a coarse uniform, teach you to knot the belt the palace way. They drill your body into new obedience. Steps small, eyes lowered, speech measured, hands folded. You are told the palace does not need opinion. It needs presence. It needs someone who can carry silence the way other men carry trays. Before you ever see a red wall, you meet a clerk. He writes your name or the name they give you if they deem your village one unsuitable for halls. Names like Faithful or Quiet or Spring. He writes your age, your height, your origin. He writes the word that will follow you all your life. Eunuch. He gives you papers whose characters you cannot read. The stamp is red. You are now property of the Son of Heaven. The road to Beijing is long even in the best season. You travel under the eye of handlers whose ropes are words, not cords. In a city outside the capital, you are inspected like a horse. Teeth, eyes, scar. In some dynasties, Ming especially, inspectors are thorough. Frauds are common, intact men masquerading as eunuchs to steal a place in the inner court. They are discovered with brutality. Tests are devised that leave no ambiguity. You learn the law of your kind before you even meet your masters. In the tea stalls near the outer city, older eunuchs drink loudly, boast quietly, laugh with mouths that never quite smile. They teach you the jokes about literati who sneer at eunuchs while bribing them, about generals who despise court mice until they need a message carried through 3 locked doors. They teach you rules they will never write down, never be seen running, never be the last to leave a room, never be the first to speak, never forget the name of a sleeping mat outside a high door, never call attention to your hands. The capital burrows into your nose before it burrows into your soul. Coal smoke, cabbage steam, horse dung, incense, hot iron. The city wall kneels on the horizon like a mountain pushed flat. You enter through a gate whose arch is wider than your village. The streets inside are straight in a way that makes you nervous. The sky seems lower. And then the palace itself, a rectangle of rectangles, gates piled upon gates, vermilion walls so clean they make you ashamed of your thoughts. Eaves that curl like frozen waves, tiles glazed with the arrogance of emperors who built roofs to outshine heaven and then called it harmony. You pass through one gate and then another. Meridian, supreme harmony, gate of heavenly purity, names that taste like bronze in your mouth. Each courtyard is larger than the last. each echo more threatening. You learn that the palace is an organism. It digests men, it circulates whispers, it excretes scandals, it never sleeps. Your first lodging is not in a hall of jade, but in a barracks for eunuch novices, planks stacked as bunks, quilts that smell of other boys, a brazier that never quite warms the corners. A senior eunuch with a voice like dry paper reads the rules. Rise before the drum, sleep after the drum. Wash when told, speak only to answer. Do not bring outside names inside. If you are sent to fetch, do not drop. If you are sent to stand, do not sway. They tell you that to serve the inner court, you must be invisible until summoned, then irreplaceable until dismissed. Training begins the next dawn. You learn the geography of service, the outer court, where ministers shuffle, the inner court, where women and shadows rule, the inner court, where the emperor's breath steams the winter air and where every gesture is a decree. You learn to read faces the way scholars read texts. You practice the bow proper to a concubine of the second rank, the angle of head for a princess of the third, the silence required when an imperial baby cries. You practice walking with a tea tray over uneven brick until neither cup nor hand trembles. You practice saying yes 50 ways, all of them deferential, none servile. You also learn what your body has become. Your voice finds a pitch not quite boy and not quite man. Your beard does not come. Your hips soften. Your belly resists discipline. Your bones retain a kind of boyhood longer than they should. The palace teaches you to wear your difference like armor. No wife will whisper to you in the night. No child will bear your name. But in the world you now inhabit, those losses become credentials. You are safe. You cannot father a dynasty in the harem. You cannot seed a rival clan. You are the emperor's instrument precisely because you are nobody else's. You write home if someone will write for you. You dictate news you don't quite understand. That the gate of supreme harmony is taller than dreams. That the empress's litter smells like sandalwood. That the rice is always hot. That the water is always boiled. That men here speak in sentences that have more courtyards than your village has houses. Your mother weeps over the letter. Your father holds it like proof that the gamble paid. You fold their faces back into your memory and repeat the first lesson of service. You belong to the red walls now. Not every boy survives even this far. Some are caught stealing millet and are beaten and expelled, thrown back to villages where shame is sharper than winter. Some lose heart and run, only to be dragged back by ward guards whose punishments are lessons for the rest. Some become sick in the city air and fade to nothing, bones left inside walls that will never speak their names. If you last a year, you learn to believe you will last 10. If you last 10, you begin to believe you may become more than hands and silence. For in barracks whispers, legends grow like mold on rice, of eunuchs who rose from broom closets to command kitchens, from kitchens to keys, from keys to seals, from seals to councils, of men without sons who arranged marriages, of men without wives who chose empresses, of functionaries who became favourites, favourites who became ministers in all but name. They are cautionary tales as much as inspirations, because every legend of ascent is followed by a legend of a fall, of purges, of flayings, of exiles to the border where the wind is a knife. You learn to want carefully, but that is later. For now, the origin is all that matters. The knife, the jar, the binding, the first bow, the first morning you wake in the capital and realize the world will never again call you son. You reshaped your body to fit a door that opens only inward. You stepped through. The red walls have a hunger for boys who will become shadows. And you, mutilated, ambitious, frightened, have begun to learn how to be one. The palace is not a building, it is a labyrinth, and you do not walk into it so much as dissolve into it. From the outside, the red walls look smooth, eternal, but once inside, you learn that every courtyard hides another courtyard, Every door hides another door, and every one of them has rules older than memory. The first lesson: you are no longer a boy from a village or a criminal spared execution. You are property of the Son of Heaven, and property does not ask questions. Your first quarters are not the elegant tiled roofs you saw from afar, but barracks for novices, planks stacked as beds, thin quilts shared, a brazier that glows only faintly. The air is thick with sweat, incense, and fear. Boys your age shuffle in silence, shaved heads gleaming, eyes darting at the older eunuchs who inspect you like livestock. You know instantly who is in charge, not by their uniforms, but by their posture. The senior eunuchs walk slowly, their hands folded, their faces carved into masks of patient contempt. They remind you in every word and gesture that survival here depends on mastering invisibility. The drills begin at dawn. A drum beats, and you rise whether you slept or not. You are taught to bow, and then to bow lower. The angle of your neck is corrected with sticks. You are taught to walk, not as peasants walk, long strides, arms swinging, but in small, careful steps, eyes lowered, hands folded in front. You are taught to kneel without clumsiness, to hold trays without trembling, to stand for hours without shifting your weight. The body is retrained to be tool, ornament, shadow. Speech is drilled too. You learn honorifics, layers of them. The word for addressing a concubine of the third rank, the word for a consort, the word for an empress. You practice until your tongue obeys automatically, because one wrong syllable could be mistaken for disrespect. And disrespect in the inner court is treason. You learn that to the emperor you never speak directly unless asked. You kneel, you present, you wait. To be too silent is dangerous. To be too familiar is fatal. Humiliation is constant, deliberate. You are sent to scrub floors until your knees bleed, to carry chamber pots from halls richer than temples, to polish bronze mirrors until you see your own face warped into submission. Older eunuchs slap you for mistakes, sometimes for no reason. They remind you, better to be slapped here than beheaded later. You accept it because what else can you do? You chose, or were chosen, for this life, and the walls are too high to escape. After drills, you are given first duties. Lowly eunuchs clean corridors, sweep courtyards, fetch water for laundries, stoke braziers in winter. You run errands that never end, your small legs carrying documents from hall to hall, knowing better than to peek at their seals. You serve at banquets, standing behind chairs with hands folded until someone gestures, then darting forward to refill a cup or carry a dish. You learn to anticipate, to see without looking, to move before being asked. The best eunuch is like breath, unnoticed until absent. Yet even at the bottom, you see glimpses of the machinery. You glimpse concubines carried in litters, their faces behind veils, their silks trailing. You glimpse princes running through gardens, tutors chasing after them. You glimpse ministers bowing in outer courts, sweating as they wait for summons. You realize that every corridor is a vein and every message a pulse, and eunuchs are the blood that moves it all. The emperor may be the heart, but without you, nothing circulates. That knowledge is dangerous. It is also intoxicating. Food is better than in your village, but never yours. Rice, millet, cabbage, sometimes meat on festival days. Always rationed, always watched. Steal a dumpling and you may lose a hand. Share too much gossip at the table and you may lose your tongue. The palace is generous in spectacle, but miserly in trust. At night, in the barracks, whispers fill the dark. Older boys warn the younger. Never speak of what you see in the women's quarters. Never let an official bribe you in a way that can be proven. Never believe a promise of protection unless it comes with a seal. They tell stories of eunuchs who rose to power, commanders of guards, keepers of seals, men who whispered in emperors' ears, and of those same men dragged in chains, flayed, executed, their names erased. The lesson is clear. Everything here is possible, but nothing here is safe. You begin to feel your own body changing. Your voice is neither boy's nor man's, breaking into odd registers. Your beard never comes. Your hips soften, your belly widens. Your strength seems to fade in some ways and sharpen in others. You are marked forever. No wife, no sons, no legacy outside these walls. But inside these walls, the wound becomes your qualification. You are trusted precisely because you are broken. Months turn into years. You rise slightly, from sweeping to assisting in kitchens, from kitchens to carrying robes, from robes to attending minor officials. You learn the geography of power, which eunuchs guard the emperor's seal, which manage the harem, which oversee the treasury, which whisper to consorts. You realize that the red walls do not just hide the emperor's household, they hide an entire shadow government, and eunuchs are its spine. Still, you are a novice. You live under rules, under eyes, under the constant reminder that one mistake can send you back to nothing. But already you feel it. The palace has seeped into your bones. You bow at the right angles, you walk at the right pace, you swallow your words. You are becoming invisible, and in invisibility, you are becoming indispensable. Day begins before the emperor's drumbeat. You wake in the barracks to the rattle of bowls and the sharp bark of a senior eunuch. The air is cold, even in summer, because stone walls never warm. You wash quickly, splash water that smells of ashes onto your face, and tighten your belt. Already your body moves by habit, head lowered, steps measured, breath shallow, as if every gesture has been rehearsed by generations before you. Your first duties are menial. Sweep courtyards, polish bronze, wipe footprints from tiles that are meant to remain eternally pristine. Carry chamber pots from halls where concubines sleep on silk sheets, their dreams worth more than your life. Stoke the braziers so the air smells faintly of sandalwood and never of smoke. You do it all in silence. A good eunuch is like a shadow, present, necessary, but never noticed. Food is carried in, robes carried out, notes delivered, doors opened and closed. At first it feels like slavery, endless errands that prove nothing. But slowly you realize the errands are not about tasks. They are about learning. Which robe goes to which consort? Which dish is favored by which prince? Which message is delivered urgently, which left to wait? Information is currency, and you are handling it constantly, disguised as chores. You serve meals in the women's quarters. You bow lower than the trays you carry. Concubines glance at you and see nothing but a servant without manhood, safe, ignorable. Yet you notice everything. Who whispers to whom, whose smile fades when another enters, which gifts are hidden, which letters burned. You are trusted because you are broken. And because you are trusted, you hear the palace breathing secrets it does not realize you hear. You attend ceremonies in the outer court, standing behind officials with your eyes fixed on the floor. You memorize names, ranks, rituals. You hear ministers argue, see their faces strain with false obedience, and you know, their polished speeches matter less than the note you carried earlier, sealed in red, delivered from one eunuch chief to another. The empire runs on bureaucracy, but the palace runs on whispers. And whispers pass through eunuch hands. The monotony is crushing. Endless corridors, endless orders. You fetch robes for an empress who changes 3 times a day. You polish jade bowls until your reflection looks more exhausted each night. You stand guard at doors not to keep intruders out, but to keep secrets in. Yet in monotony, you learn patience. And patience in the palace is sharper than any blade. Not all duties are tedious. Sometimes you are ordered to escort a princess to a festival. You ride in a cart, eyes down, but you glimpse the city beyond the walls. Merchants, beggars, soldiers, temples. You see how vast the empire is and how small the palace remains, yet how completely the palace rules. Sometimes you accompany an imperial procession, carrying banners, watching crowds kneel. You feel the weight of the emperor's presence, even though you have never looked directly into his face. Night is not freedom. Night is another set of chores. Candles to extinguish, corridors to patrol, messages to deliver quietly. You sleep late, wake early, and in between, you whisper to other eunuchs in the barracks. They tell you the unwritten laws. Never laugh louder than a minister, never speak before being spoken to. Never forget that you belong, not to yourself, but to the emperor. They tell stories of eunuchs who forgot these laws and lost tongues, lost heads, lost everything. Yet stories also flow the other way, of eunuchs who learned the rhythm of service so well that they rose to manage kitchens, treasuries, even armies. Men who had no sons, no wives, no bloodlines, but left legacies of wealth, of monuments, of power. These stories feed you more than rice does. They tell you that invisibility, if mastered, can be transformed into indispensability. There is humiliation too. Court officials sneer. Scholars call you abomination, neither man nor woman. Children of noble families giggle at your high voice. Concubines sometimes taunt you, knowing you cannot respond. You bow, you smile, you retreat. But you remember. Eunuchs have long memories, and in the palace, memory can be sharpened into a weapon when the time is right. Your duties stretch into every corner of the court. You clean, you serve, you guard. You learn to read not books but moods, to hear not words but silences. You learn that the emperor's cough can change the fate of ministers, that the empress's glance can condemn a concubine, that the slip of your own hand can cost you more than your life. You become part of a system designed to erase individuality, yet it is in that erasure that cunning survives. Day by day, task by task, you understand. The palace is not built of wood and stone. It is built of ritual, of obedience, of secrets. And you, mutilated and humiliated, are one of its bricks. At first you are just another pair of silent hands, but silence, if used carefully, becomes more than absence. It becomes a mirror, and people love to look at themselves. You discover that the more you say yes, the more others pour their words into you. And in a palace where concubines dream of attention, princes dream of succession, and ministers dream of favor, being a listener is the sharpest weapon you can carry. You start with concubines. They treat you as invisible, but invisibility lets you hover near secrets. You carry letters, fetch hairpins, fetch tea. You watch arguments unfold between women who live in a world narrower than a courtyard, but deadlier than a battlefield. One concubine weeps into her sleeve. You whisper a prayer. She thanks you. Another fears the empress. You promise discretion. She tests you with errands. You never fail. One day she gives you a jade pendant to deliver secretly to a prince. You hesitate, then deliver. She smiles. Now you are her eunuch, her voice when hers cannot be heard. Princes too notice. They grow up behind vermilion walls, their every move watched by tutors, guards, mothers. They crave allies who do not wear ministerial robes. You carry their books, their messages, their complaints. You listen to the one who feels neglected, you laugh at the jokes of another, you comfort the frightened. They learn that eunuchs cannot compete for the throne, cannot betray them for dynasties of our own. That makes you safe. And safety in the palace is rarer than gold. Soon you serve not only food, but information. You tell a prince what his mother whispered. You tell a concubine what the empress glanced. You tell an empress which official bowed too slowly. You measure words like coins, spend them carefully, never all at once. Every whisper adds weight. And then the emperor himself. He sees thousands of faces each year, ministers, generals, foreign envoys, but only a handful of eunuchs daily. You pour his tea, you dress him, you guard his chamber at night. He notices your silence, your steadiness, your memory. He tests you with a task. Carry a sealed order to the treasury. You do it without falter. Another. Deliver a jade box to the empress. Done. A third. Remind him at dusk of a promise he made in the morning. You remember? Soon he trusts you more than a minister, because ministers argue, but eunuchs obey. Power grows invisible at first. A minister asks why the emperor seemed cold yesterday. You shrug. You know the answer, but you do not say, yet. A concubine asks if the emperor smiled at her name. You pause long enough to make her wonder. Doubt is your ally. You understand now, information is leverage, and you, once a mutilated boy, are holding threads of an empire. Other eunuchs watch, some envy, some ally, some scheme. You learn to navigate factions within your own kind, kitchen eunuchs, treasury eunuchs, harem eunuchs, guards. Each group jealously guards its territory. Rise too fast, and you will be accused of arrogance. Rise too slowly, and you will be forgotten. You choose carefully whom to flatter, whom to serve, whom to betray with silence. Wealth trickles in. A grateful concubine slips you silver. A prince rewards you with silk. Ministers bribe you to whisper their names near the emperor. You accept discreetly. Soon, your quarters hold lacquer boxes, fine robes, gifts hidden under mats. You are still a servant, but you are richer than most villagers ever dream. And yet wealth is not the true prize. The true prize is presence. When the emperor laughs, you are in the room. When the empress weeps, you hand her the cloth. When a minister is denounced, you are standing at the door. You see, you hear, you endure. You are stitched into every moment of the dynasty's heartbeat, and no decree can erase that. This is how eunuchs rise, not by armies, not by exams, not by family clans. You rise by being indispensable to the people who cannot trust anyone else. Concubines whisper to you because you cannot seduce them. Princes lean on you because you cannot dethrone them. Emperors trust you because your dynasty ends with you. Your wound is your passport. Your silence is your crown. But with influence comes peril. Every step upward paints a target on your back. Ministers curse eunuch corruption. Scholars sneer that the empire rots when eunuchs meddle. Other eunuchs sharpen daggers of rumor. And you know the histories. Dynasties before have seen eunuchs rise to run armies, to rule courts, and then be massacred in purges, their names spat like curses. You whisper to yourself, rise carefully, rise quietly, never faster than the emperor's smile. Still, at night, in your quarters filled with gifts, you allow yourself a thought. You are no longer the mutilated boy sobbing in a straw hut. You are a presence in the forbidden city, a servant who bends but does not break. The empire does not see you as man or woman, but it sees you. And sometimes, in this place, that is enough to rule. The red walls were built to keep outsiders out, but they also keep insiders in. Ministers argue in outer courts, generals ride in provinces, governors enforce laws far from the capital. Inside, in the inner court, there are only a few faces the emperor sees each day, and most of them belong to eunuchs. Ministers may write essays that thunder with Confucian virtue, but you are the one who hands the emperor his robe, who fetches the brush for his decrees, who stands by the throne while officials bow from 20 paces away. You are the last whisper before the emperor speaks. And sometimes the whisper becomes the command. History has already proven the pattern long before you rise. Eunuchs always start as servants, always climb as intermediaries, and always, eventually, cross the line into rulers. Han Dynasty emperors trusted eunuchs to guard harems. Soon they controlled access to the throne. Tang emperors relied on eunuchs for palace security. Soon eunuchs commanded armies, deposing emperors at will. Ming emperors, suspicious of ministers, placed power in eunuchs' hands deliberately. And in each case, Confucian scholars groaned, wrote memorials, denounced the corruption. And in each case, scholars lost, because a eunuch with the emperor's ear is louder than a library. You begin to see the levers. A minister submits a memorial asking for funds for irrigation. You decide when it reaches the emperor's table. Delay it, and the crops wither. Deliver it swiftly, and the minister gains favor. A general requests reinforcements. You whisper that he has been careless, and the emperor hesitates. Armies starve not on battlefields, but in palace corridors, where eunuchs measure loyalty in how many gifts arrive wrapped in silk. Soon you find yourself overseeing treasuries. Who else can the emperor trust with silver? Ministers have clans, families, ambitions. Eunuchs have none. So you count coins, manage warehouses, tally grain. And when shortages appear, when silver disappears, who dares accuse you? You serve at the emperor's side. You can explain that corrupt officials in provinces are at fault. You can cover shortages with creative numbers. And while accounts blur, your quarters fill with jade, silk, gold. The corruption is not shameful, it is expected. Everyone in the palace feeds from the same trough. Concubines favor eunuchs who can secure luxuries. Princes favor eunuchs who can finance tutors and retainers. Emperors favor eunuchs who can keep the inner court loyal. Money moves like blood, and you are the veins. But more dangerous than silver is command. Some dynasties create eunuch-led secret police. Embroidered guards in the Ming, for example, who torture, arrest, execute on whispered orders. Eunuchs become the emperor's shadow fists. Ministers dread their knock at the door more than any rebel army. You know of eunuchs who commanded whole fleets. Zheng He, the admiral who sailed treasure ships across oceans, projecting Ming power from Africa to Arabia. He was not a general by birth, but by the emperor's trust. A eunuch ruled the seas because no clan could claim his victories. You study such men and see possibilities. A eunuch cannot be father, but he can be master. A eunuch cannot pass on blood, but he can pass on power. So you cultivate networks, loyal juniors who carry your errands, senior allies who protect you, merchants who funnel you wealth, officials who depend on your whispers. Soon you are not just a servant, you are a faction. Confucian scholars gnash their teeth. They denounce eunuch corruption in endless memorials. They complain that the empire rots from within, that the palace is a brothel of greed. They are not wrong, but their virtue is powerless against proximity. They bow at outer gates, you whisper in inner chambers. Their memorials stack unread, your murmurs land directly in imperial ears. Of course, power draws knives. Other eunuchs scheme against you, rival factions form. Some emperors tire of shadows growing too thick. History is filled with purges. Eunuchs executed in hundreds, even thousands accused of treason, their wealth seized, their names cursed. You live with that risk daily. But you also know that even after every purge, eunuchs rise again. The palace cannot function without them. Ministers leave with each dynasty. Eunuchs remain. So you keep climbing. You dress the emperor. You control the seals. You manage the treasury. You whisper judgments. Ministers bow to you though they spit afterward. Concubines flatter you though they despise you. Princes court you though they curse you. And you smile because you remember the boy in the straw hut, bleeding after the knife, terrified he would never even survive. Now you stand in vermilion corridors with gold under your bed and fear in every eye that looks at you. It is corruption, yes. It is dominance, yes. But in the palace, those words are synonyms for survival. You are a eunuch. You are indispensable. And for the moment, that is the closest thing to ruling the empire. If the palace teaches you patience, it also teaches you dread. The red walls give power, but they never let you forget that every step upward is taken on a floor greased with blood. Ministers may hate you, concubines may use you, emperors may trust you, but emperors also die. And when they do, eunuchs are often the first scapegoats dragged into the light. History whispers warnings to you every night in the barracks. You hear of Han Dynasty eunuchs who strangled princes, controlled succession, grew so arrogant that generals stormed the palace and slaughtered them in heaps. You hear of Tang eunuchs who commanded armies only to be purged in waves of vengeance when a new emperor swore to cleanse the rot. You hear of Ming eunuchs who became rich enough to own estates only to be executed when a Confucian minister convinced the emperor that eunuch corruption was the empire's sickness. Each dynasty repeats the same pattern: rise, dominance, purge. The cycle is as predictable as the seasons. And yet every generation of boys still lines up for the knife, because even a dangerous life in the palace is better than starving in a field. You know this, and so you live with dread the way soldiers live with arrows, expecting them, dodging them, hoping you are not the one hit today. The dangers are everywhere. Rival eunuchs sharpen rumors like blades. If you rise too fast, someone whispers you are plotting treason. If you grow too rich, someone delivers a memorial accusing you of theft. If the emperor frowns once in your presence, rivals pounce, repeating the story until frown becomes crime. Ministers, too, never stop attacking. They may bow in front of you, but in their essays to the emperor, they spit venom. The empire is sick because eunuchs meddle. Dismiss them or lose heaven's mandate. Sometimes an emperor listens. Then the purges begin. Eunuchs dragged from quarters, their wealth seized, their bodies paraded through markets before execution. Some are strangled quietly in cells, others beheaded at gates, others mutilated to satisfy public hatred. Crowds cheer, scholars write essays praising justice. But you know, as you watch names vanish from the roster, that the purge never ends eunuchs. It only trims the branches so new shoots can grow. The palace cannot run without you. Still, you live each day as if a drumbeat might signal your end. You learn habits of survival. Never keep all your wealth in one place. Never speak ill of rivals where walls can hear. Never believe an emperor's favor is permanent. You flatter ministers even as they curse you. You lend money to rivals so they owe you. You prepare escape routes inside the palace itself. And always you carry silence like a shield. The execution ground is not the only fear. Sometimes disgrace is enough. One wrong word, one failed errand, one accusation of insulting a concubine, and you can be cast out. A eunuch without the palace is a eunuch without heir. Villagers mock you as neither man nor woman. Merchants cheat you. Families lock their doors. Exile is humiliation worse than death. Better to bleed on palace stones than to live unwanted outside them. Even emperors are danger. They may trust you 1 year and turn on you the next. They may shower you with gifts and then accuse you of theft. They may use you as scapegoat when famines strike, when wars fail, when rebellions flare. The eunuchs misled me, an emperor declares, and suddenly the people nod. You cannot defend yourself. You bow, you kneel, you bleed, you live every day with a knife above your head. The same knife that cut you once now waits to cut your life away. And yet you stay, because the knife is everywhere in China, in fields of famine, in the courts of magistrates, in the armies of warlords. At least here, behind vermilion walls, the knife is gilded, and sometimes it spares you. Still, you whisper to yourself when the lanterns dim, do not rise too fast, do not shine too brightly, do not trust too deeply. You live like a shadow, indispensable, invisible, always one step from execution. And this is the truth of every eunuch's life. Power without safety, wealth without heirs, honor without honor. You are servant, master, whisperer, scapegoat. You can rise higher than generals, richer than ministers, closer than concubines. But you will never sleep without fear, because every dynasty eventually decides the empire's sins are the eunuch's fault. And when that day comes, no treasure jar, no whispered favor, no careful bow can save you. You live your life in the shadow of vermilion walls, bowing, whispering, surviving. And yet the question hovers. Can a eunuch ever truly rise, not only to power, but to honor? Can a man with no sons, no line, no legacy outside the palace, ever become more than a servant dressed in silk? The short answer is no. Dynasties measure nobility by lineage, by bloodlines stretching back to sage kings or imagined ancestors blessed by heaven. Eunuchs have no sons, no daughters, no future sealed by blood. Your line ends with you. You cannot pass estates. You cannot weave alliances through marriage. Even if the emperor showers you with land and gold, when you die, it returns to the state or is seized by rivals. Nobility is denied you because you cannot reproduce it. That is the cruel arithmetic. And yet the longer answer is yes, because power is its own nobility and memory is its own dynasty. History records eunuchs who became richer than dukes, who commanded more soldiers than generals, who whispered more decrees than ministers. Some had palaces of their own, filled with servants, art, silks, treasures hauled in from tribute missions. Zheng He, the admiral of the Ming, led fleets larger than any seen before or since, sailing across oceans, dictating to sultans and kings. He was a eunuch, and in his lifetime he was nobility in all but blood. But history is merciless. It does not remember nuance. Confucian scholars, bitter enemies of eunuch power, wrote the chronicles. To them, eunuchs were always corrupt, always treacherous, always the sign of dynasties in decline. When the Han fell, they said, it was the eunuchs. When the Tang faltered, it was the eunuchs. When the Ming collapsed, it was the eunuchs. Every famine, every rebellion, every corruption was laid at your feet. Ministers took bribes, governors starved peasants, emperors indulged whims. But the annals wrote, eunuchs poisoned the empire. So your legacy is double-edged. In your own life, you may climb higher than any scholar ever dreamed, close enough to hear the emperor breathe in his sleep, powerful enough to make provinces tremble. But after death, your name may be spat, your wealth seized, your deeds rewritten as villainy. You live as indispensable, you die as scapegoat. And yet the truth is more complicated. Eunuchs kept the palace running when ministers were locked out. Eunuchs guarded the harem, ensuring that imperial bloodlines remained secure. Eunuchs delivered orders that armies marched on, managed treasuries that funded temples and walls. The empire could not function without you. Ministers resented it, scholars denied it, emperors knew it, eunuchs lived it. That is your paradox. Despised publicly, needed privately, cursed in chronicles, trusted in chambers. Could you become nobility? Sometimes emperors ennobled eunuchs with titles, marquesates, even princely ranks. But it was always an awkward fit. A marquess with no heirs, a prince with no clan. When you died, your title withered. Nobility in China meant perpetuation. Eunuchs embodied impermanence. The palace allowed you wealth, silks, mansions, but never eternity. Eternity belonged to clans, to lineages, to names carved into genealogies. Your name, even when carved, often came with curses. And what of memory among common people? To villagers, eunuchs were frightening, uncanny. Neither man nor woman, wielding power behind walls they would never see. To concubines, eunuchs were confidants, protectors, sometimes cruel wardens. To princes, eunuchs were tutors, allies, sometimes manipulators. To emperors, eunuchs were tools that could become too sharp, but in whispered tales, in market gossip, you are also remembered as survivors. The boy cut in a straw hut who rose to hold the imperial seal. The servant mocked for his voice who commanded fleets across oceans. The shadow who became the sun inside the forbidden city. You are remembered as warning and inspiration, curse and legend. So your legacy is not nobility in the traditional sense. It is something stranger, a nobility of proximity, of whispers, of indispensability. You never escape the scar of the knife, but you turn the scar into a credential. You never escape the contempt of ministers, but you turn contempt into fear. You never escape the silence of being childless, but you turn silence into secrets that shape empires. And when dynasties fall, when new emperors rise, when scholars sharpen their brushes to condemn the eunuchs of the past, you accept it. because you know the truth that chronicles never write. The empire would have collapsed sooner without you. The palace would have rotted from within. The emperor's bloodline would have been poisoned by ambition. Eunuchs were not the disease. Eunuchs were the scar tissue that kept the body staggering forward. History will not admit it, but you know it. And maybe, buried in vermilion shadows, that is enough. Our next story will be about medieval foods. If you've ever wondered what knights and peasants eat to sustain themselves, be sure to listen along. In the medieval world, food is not a comfort or pastime. It is the measure of life itself, the first thought upon waking and the last fear before sleep. To eat is survival, and survival is never guaranteed. One harvest gone sour, one storm too many, one tax collector too greedy, and the line between meal and famine vanishes. For the vast majority of men and women, the question is not what they will eat, but whether they will eat. Hunger is not a rare calamity, it is a recurring season. Years of plenty are followed by years of want, and villagers learn early that a full belly is temporary, while an empty one is inevitable. Every community looks anxiously to the harvest. Grain is not simply food, it is the pillar upon which society rests. Wheat in the wealthier regions, rye and barley in poorer soils, oats in the north, millet in the south. Each kernel is counted in prayers and in rent. A bad yield is disaster, not just for peasants, but for nobles who depend upon their labour. When fields fail, castles grow nervous. Bread is the backbone of life. But bread is not a soft loaf with crusts golden and inviting. It is heavy, dark, sometimes sour, often mixed with peas or beans to stretch the flour, sometimes adulterated with bark or ground acorns in times of famine. Teeth break before loaves do. The wealthy may eat fine white bread made from sifted wheat. The poor chew coarse rye, black as soil and just as hard. The loaf tells you who you are. Preservation is the obsession of every household from manor to hut. Meat is rare fresh, more often salted, smoked or dried until its flavour is more brine than flesh. Salt is so precious it moves along trade routes like silver. A pinch of it can preserve life as surely as it preserves pork. Cabbages are pickled, fish are dried, beans stored in sacks. A winter's worth of food must be laid down in autumn, or the cold months become a sentence. Ale and small beer flow everywhere, not for pleasure alone, but for safety. Water, stagnant in wells and polluted by runoff, is dangerous. Beer, brewed daily, weak in strength but safer, fills mugs of peasants and nobles alike. The wealthy sip wine, imported at cost, or pressed from their own vineyards if climate allows. But the daily drink of the medieval world is cloudy, sour ale, nourishment as much as drink. Faith shapes the table as firmly as famine. The church calendar carves the year into feasts and fasts, dictating not only when to eat, but what. Nearly half the days in a year are lean days. Wednesdays, Fridays, Lent, Advent. On such days, flesh of four-footed beasts is forbidden. Fish become salvation, pulled from rivers, raised in ponds, salted in barrels. Wealthy monasteries breed carp and pike, peasants scramble for eels, herrings, even frogs. The rule is strict, the ingenuity to bend it endless. Banquets and feasts shine in chronicles, but they are not daily life. A noble's hall may roast swan, boar, or venison for spectacle, but even there, much of the diet is bread, pottage, and salted meats. For the peasant, celebration means a thicker stew, perhaps a sliver of bacon, perhaps an onion or two spared from storage. Daily meals are monotony, the same ladle of pottage day after day, changed only by what the season grants. Superstition and medicine mingle in every pot. Physicians, quoting Galen and Aristotle, declare that foods carry qualities: hot, cold, moist, dry. To eat is not merely to fill the belly, but to balance the body's humours. Cabbage may cool, garlic may inflame, Pepper may warm the blood. A nobleman's kitchen is as much pharmacy as larder, each dish prepared with thought to health and temperament. Peasants too believe, though more in charms than charts. Garlic wards off illness, onions strengthen, milk comforts. Food is not just sustenance, but remedy, shield, sometimes curse. The kitchen itself, whether in hut or castle, is an altar to necessity. In a peasant's house, it is a hearth, smoky and dim, where pots hang over coals, where a family crowds for warmth. In a manor, it is a great hall, staffed by scullions and cooks, smoke rising into rafters blackened by centuries of roasting. In both places, fire rules. The spit, the pot, the oven. These are the trinity of medieval cooking, and the fire consumes as much wood as the people consume bread. Every meal, every crumb is a statement. To eat white bread is to be noble, to eat rye is to be poor, to eat fresh meat is to feast, to eat salted herring is to fast. To drink wine is to belong to wealth, to drink ale is to belong to the earth. To starve is to be common, to feast is to be envied. Food divides as surely as walls and laws. So the foundation of medieval cuisine is not flavor or variety, it is survival. And survival is measured in sacks of grain, barrels of salt, and the patience of God. Hunger crouches at the door of every hut, every manor, every castle, waiting for its moment to enter. And when it does, the difference between knight and peasant shrinks. Because even in gilded halls, you cannot eat gold. Step into a peasant's hut and you will smell the kitchen before you see it. Not garlic sizzling, not roasted meats dripping fat into flames, but smoke, damp straw, sour ale, and the faint earthy odour of root vegetables stored too long in pits. The hearth is the heart, a blackened hole dug into the earth or a crude fire on flat stones. Above it hangs a pot that rarely cools. That pot is the peasant kitchen, and inside it is not cuisine, but survival. Pottage. Pottage is everything, and nothing. Barley boiled until swollen, oats softened until nearly liquid, peas, beans, cabbage, turnips, onions when fortune smiles, salt if you have it, herbs if they grow nearby, bones if the pig left any after rent was paid. Sometimes a scrap of bacon floats like treasure. Sometimes nothing more than barley water stares back at you. Every day it changes slightly, depending on what is left, what the season gives, what the steward has not yet taken for tax. And every day it remains the same, ladle after ladle of monotony, the taste of life reduced to endurance. Bread joins the pot, but bread is not fluffy or inviting. A coarse loaf of rye, heavy and dark, chewed slowly to make it last. In years of scarcity, the flour is cut with beans, peas, sometimes even ground acorns or bark. Bread stretches, bread deceives hunger, bread proves who you are. White wheat loaves belong to nobility, black rye belongs to the poor. In a hut, the bread is blacker than the rafters and harder than the table it sits on. Ale is not indulgence, it is hydration. Small beer, weak and sour, brewed constantly, drunk by children and elders alike. Water from streams or wells carries disease. Ale, boiled and fermented, is safer. Every village brews, every house consumes. Cups of crude wood, filled endlessly, not a toast to joy, but a shield against thirst. Meals follow seasons. Spring gives nothing but hunger, and the last shriveled roots from winter storage. The hungry gap, they call it, the weeks before the first greens sprout, when bellies grow hollow and tempers short. Summer brings beans, peas, cabbages, berries if you're lucky. Autumn gives harvest, the brief moment of plenty, when granaries fill and pottage grows thick. Winter strips again, salted fish if you were provident, dried beans, ale, cabbage sour in barrels. Hunger waits behind every frost. Meat is rare. Chickens lay eggs, so killing them wastes food. Cows plough fields and give milk, so beef is slaughtered only when the beast grows old or sick. Pigs are more common, easy to fatten, easier to slaughter, but the Lord takes the best. What peasants eat is scraps, ears, feet, fat boiled into stews. When meat does appear in pottage, it is a festival in itself. More often, meat is a smell drifting from the manor's kitchens, unreachable. Cheese and dairy fill the gaps. Milk spoils quickly, but butter and cheese endure. Peasants churn, peasants press, peasants spread their survival on coarse bread. Eggs appear when hens allow, though many are taken as rent. Honey is rare, sugar unheard of, sweetness a memory more than a taste. The kitchen is not variety, it is repetition. A wife stirs the pot the same way every day. Husband chews bread with the same grim patience. Children sip ale that tastes the same as yesterday's and tomorrow's. Hunger dulls the tongue, but the memory of feast sharpens it. They dream of meat, of spice, of wheat bread, but dreams are for knights and merchants. Yet the peasant kitchen is not barren of ingenuity. Herbs gathered from fields, parsley, sage, dill, brighten stews. Wild fruits find their way into pies of rough crust. On feast days, villagers roast whole animals, spit over flames, dance around fires with bellies finally full. The calendar brings small mercies, weddings, baptisms, saints' days, harvest festivals. For a few hours, the pot thickens, the bread whitens, the ale strengthens. Then it thins again, back to monotony. Hygiene is another flavour. Pots are rarely scrubbed clean. Instead, new stew is poured into old, a perpetual broth stretching weeks. Smoke blackens rafters and lungs alike. The taste of food is never separated from the taste of soot. And yet without soot, there is no warmth. The kitchen is hearth, light, life. Peasants know their place by their meals. To eat pottage is to be common. To eat venison is to be noble. To drink ale is to belong to soil. To sip wine is to belong to courts. Every spoonful is a reminder of hierarchy, as sharp as a steward's tally. And yet, in all its simplicity, the peasant kitchen sustains kingdoms. Knights may dine on swan, lords may toast with wine, but their bodies rest on the backs of those who eat cabbage stew in smoky huts. Without the monotony of the pot, the castles fall. Without the daily bread, the feast cannot exist. So the peasant kitchen is not poor in importance. It is poor in taste, poor in choice, poor in comfort, but it is the floor upon which the entire medieval world stands. Step into a noble's hall, and the air smells different. Not of sour ale and smoke-thick rafters, but of roasting flesh, of spices that sting the nose, of beeswax candles instead of greasy rushlights. The knight's kitchen is not designed to fill bellies, it is designed to display power. Where the peasant pot whispers survival, the lord's table shouts spectacle. Bread is still the anchor, but not black rye chewed into silence. A knight eats manchere, fine white wheat bread sifted clean, baked by skilled hands. The whiter the loaf, the higher the status, proof you can afford grain wasted in refining. Where peasants break teeth on bark-mixed loaves, a knight tears soft bread that signals rank before it ever meets the tongue. Meat dominates the noble table, venison from hunts, pork fattened on oak forests, beef slaughtered from herds too valuable for peasants, poultry from dovecotes. Game birds, herons, peacocks, even swans, are roasted whole, sometimes redressed in feathers for display. Hunting itself is privilege. Eating what was hunted is confirmation of nobility. Every joint carved, every beast roasted, is less about nourishment than about hierarchy. Fish appears too, but not as necessity. It is abundance dressed as piety. On fasting days, knights consume sturgeon, salmon, eels, all pulled from rivers controlled by their rights. A peasant catching eels for survival risks fines. A noble serves them as delicacy, surrounded by silver platters. And then, the true mark of wealth, spices. Pepper from India, cinnamon from Ceylon, cloves, nutmeg, saffron, carried by caravans across continents, by ships across seas. Worth more than gold by weight, spices transform dishes into symbols. A knight does not sprinkle pepper for taste. He sprinkles it to remind guests that he has coin enough to burn across oceans. Stews rich with saffron glow golden like the sun, signaling wealth before spoons touch lips. Banquets become theatre. The table is set with trenchers, flat rounds of stale bread used as plates, later fed to dogs or beggars. Platters grown with pies stuffed with pigeons, boars glazed in honey, towers of pastries gilded with sugar when sugar appears. Between courses, entertainments parade, jugglers, musicians, fools, sometimes even live birds released from pies to astonish diners. Eating is performance, each dish a prop, each guest an audience. And yet, beneath the show, reality tastes different. The meat, salted for storage, is often tough, its flavour dulled by brine. The spices cover rot as often as they enhance flavour. Fresh meat is rare outside feasts. Even nobles chew on preserved cuts most days. The kitchens bustle, not with endless roasting, but with boiling cauldrons, salting barrels, smokehouses belching day after day. Knights eat better than peasants, yes, but they still live in a world without refrigeration, without hygiene, without variety by modern measure. Servants swarm the hall, refilling goblets, carving joints, clearing trenchers. The knight himself rarely touches knives. His carver demonstrates his skill with flourishes, slicing venison into pieces small enough for delicate fingers. Nobility does not gnaw, it nibbles, even when gnawing is the truth. Table manners are as important as meat. A knight proves superiority by how little he must touch, how gracefully he eats, how much he wastes. To waste is not sin here, it is glory. Wine flows, imported from southern vineyards or local presses. Stronger ale fills mugs for lesser guests. Nobles sip, peasants gulp, toasts rise, tankards clash, and the hall roars with laughter and music. Feasting is not only indulgence, but also politics. Alliances sealed with cups. Loyalty proven by presence at a lord's table. To be fed is to be acknowledged. To be excluded is to be shamed. Knights eat more, eat richer, but they also eat to be seen. Their kitchens are statements of rank, their feasts are weapons of prestige, and every roasted swan or gilded pie carries the same message. We are not peasants. But when the feast ends, when the candles gutter and the platters are cleared, the gap between pageantry and reality returns. The noble still eats bread daily, still drinks ale, still chews salted meat through winter. The difference is quantity, variety and spice. Where a peasant eats to endure, a knight eats to display. The body may be nourished in similar ways, but the reputation is fed differently. So the knight's kitchen is less about flavour and more about theatre, more about the gold leaf on the pie than the pie itself, more about the saffron glow than the stew beneath, more about who sees you eat than what you taste. And in the end, for all their feasts, knights too live under the same fragile harvests, the same salted barrels, the same hunger in bad years. The banquet is louder, richer, brighter, but still built on the same fields that feed the peasant pot. If the medieval world has a true enemy, it is not rival kingdoms, not wolves at the edge of fields, not even plague that creeps through towns. The constant enemy is rot. Food wants to spoil. The air conspires, the damp invades, the vermin arrive. The kitchen, whether in a smoky hut or a castle hall, is not only a place of cooking, but a battlefield against decay. Every meal is a small victory, every barrel a fortress, every grain sack a gamble. The hearth is the centre of all cooking. In a peasant's hut, it is a pit in the floor or a crude fireplace with stones piled high, smoke curling directly into rafters until every beam is blackened and lungs wheeze. In a manor kitchen, the hearth is vast, wide enough to roast oxen, with spits that creak as servants turn them hour after hour. Flames lick iron cauldrons, embers glow beneath flat stones for baking, hooks dangle pots from beams. Fire provides warmth, flavour and death if not controlled. Houses burn as often as they feed. Ovens are rarer, treasures of villages and castles alike. Communal ovens in towns bake the week's loaves, each family marking dough with symbols to retrieve their bread. The heat is intense, the crust's hard, but bread keeps longer when baked this way. In castles, ovens produce finer bread, pies, pastries stuffed with meat and fish. The difference between rye loaves and wheat manchet is baked not only in flour, but in privilege. Preservation defines the kitchen more than cooking. Salt is king. A barrel of salt pork can last through winter, though its taste becomes more brine than flesh. Fish salted on the coast is shipped inland, hard as wood, until soaked and boiled. Cheese extends milk into seasons when cows give none. Butter is churned, salted, stored in crocks. Smoking is the ally of both peasant and knight. Hooks hang hams, sausages, strips of beef in rafters above hearths. Smoke seeps in, drying and flavouring, creating a barrier against rot. The smell of a hut is as much smoke curing as it is soup. Castles build separate smokehouses, filling them with meat for households that number in the hundreds. The work is endless: cut, hang, smoke, store, repeat. Fermentation is the other secret army. Cabbages are packed into barrels with salt, transforming into sauerkraut that lasts through frost. Beets ferment into sour soups. Grains ferment into ale, into beer, bubbling in casks that never rest. Even fish are fermented in pits along coasts, producing sauces so pungent they carry across markets. To eat is to eat what has been transformed by time, by yeast, by rot harnessed instead of feared. Drying is simple, constant. Apples sliced and laid in sun, beans strung on cords, mushrooms shriveled over embers. Sun and air do the work when weather allows. But vermin lurk. Rats gnaw grain sacks, insects crawl through stores, mould spreads where damp hides. Cats are treasured not for affection, but for claws. Boys guard granaries with sticks. Still, losses are inevitable, measured in handfuls, bushels, sometimes in despair. Cooking itself is simple in tools, but varied in method. Boiling dominates. Great cauldrons suspended over flames, stews bubbling for hours, grains swelling until edible. Roasting is spectacle, requiring spits, constant turning, much wood. Frying exists but is rare, oil being precious. Baking produces breads and pies when ovens are available. Most flavours come not from recipes, but from whatever herbs or scraps are at hand. For the noble kitchen, preservation is less desperation and more abundance. Spices from far lands are added not just for flavour, but to signal wealth and to mask the age of meat. Dishes are layered with ginger, cinnamon, pepper, saffron, turning even salted beef into performance. For peasants, parsley, dill, mustard seeds and wild garlic provide the only sparks against monotony. The battle against rot is endless, and everyone knows the stakes. If grain spoils, famine follows. If salt runs out, meat rots. If stores are raided by vermin, winter becomes death. Families count barrels like soldiers, each one guarding life. In manors, stewards tally, punish, scold, fearing not just hunger, but rebellion if bellies grow empty. The medieval kitchen, then, is less about taste than about endurance. Every loaf baked, every ham salted, every cabbage packed into barrels is another day of survival. When the cauldron bubbles, it carries not just food, but victory. Victory over time, over decay, over the constant gnawing shadow of hunger. In the medieval world, a meal is never only a meal. It is a sermon, a performance, a declaration of where you belong in the order of things. Bread, meat and drink are not just sustenance. They are symbols, and symbols feed reputations as much as stomachs. To sit at a table is to know your place, and to eat from it is to display it. Begin with fasting, because the calendar eats first. The Church divides the year into feast days and lean days, into Lent and Advent, into vigils and Fridays. Nearly half the days in a year are fast days, when flesh of beasts is forbidden. On those days, the peasant's diet changes little, meat is scarce anyway, but the noble kitchen must adjust. Fish becomes the solution, salmon for the rich, eels for the resourceful, herrings for the masses, carp bred in monastery ponds. Eggs are often forbidden too, forcing cooks to become inventive. Milk is withdrawn, butter replaced by almond paste in wealthy households. A nobleman who disobeys may be scolded by priests, but the fear of sin keeps most to the rules, at least visibly. When the fast breaks, the feast swells. The difference is not hunger versus fullness, but monotony versus spectacle. For peasants, a feast means thicker pottage, an extra loaf, a sliver of bacon, maybe a shared goose at harvest festival. For knights, a feast means days of preparation, kitchens roaring with fires, barrels rolled into halls, musicians hired, banners hung. The act of eating becomes theatre. Banquets are choreographed as carefully as battles. Trenchers of bread or wooden boards are laid in rows. The high table sits on a dais where the Lord and his chosen dine on the finest cuts. Below, lesser guests eat coarser dishes. Servants eat scraps after the hall empties. The structure of society is repeated in the structure of the meal, rank above rank, belly above belly. The dishes themselves shout status. A roasted swan, its feathers reattached and gilded, is not served for taste. It is served as a symbol of extravagance. A pie stuffed with live birds, released to flutter around the hall, proves wealth by waste. Sugar sculptures, when sugar finally arrives in Europe, form castles and beasts displayed before they are eaten. To eat such things is to remind guests. Here lives a lord who commands more than fields. He commands spectacle. Even the order of dishes reflects hierarchy. Soups and stews for the lesser, roasts and spiced meats for the high. Wine imported from distant vineyards for the lord, local ale for the rest. Spices are the brightest signals. Pepper from India, cinnamon, ginger, saffron, glowing gold. To sprinkle such treasure on meat is to declare that silver flows through your coffers. To dine without it is to reveal your poverty. For peasants, meals are also about status, but on a humbler scale. The size of a loaf marks a family's fortune. To serve fresh bread instead of stale marks good harvest. To share ale freely marks generosity. Weddings and harvest feasts bind villages together, and the one who slaughters the ox for all proves himself more than prosperous. He proves himself leader. Even in poverty, food becomes social glue, and those who can feed are those who can command. Hospitality itself is weaponized. A nobleman must feed guests lavishly, not only out of courtesy, but out of politics. A poor feast is insult, a rich one is alliance. To sit guests too low at the table is humiliation. To place them near the high table is honor. The meal speaks when words fail. The act of wasting food is itself display. To leave trenchers uneaten, to discard meats, to feed dogs with loaves still warm, this is not sin, but theatre. It says, we are not peasants scraping pots. We are nobles with more than we need. Waste is luxury's cruel twin, and it stalks every banquet hall. And yet fasting always returns, cutting spectacle back to austerity. Monks dine on fish and beans, lords sip almond milk in place of butter, peasants chew cabbage pottage with no meat. The Church insists that denial is as important as indulgence. The cycle of fast and feast keeps bellies humble, even when halls glitter. Food, then, is the language of hierarchy. To eat coarse bread is to confess poverty. To eat manchet white as bone is to proclaim nobility. To sip ale is to admit common birth. To drink wine is to display wealth. To boil cabbage is to endure. To roast peacock is to rule. Every meal is a reminder. In this world, food is never just food. It is symbol, sermon, weapon. And at every table, from smoky hut to shining hall, men and women eat not only to live, but to prove who they are. The medieval world is divided by walls, by banners, by laws. But nowhere is the divide clearer than at the table. Food is the mirror of society. To glance into a peasant's pot and then into a knight's hall is to see not only two diets, but two worlds, each reflecting the same soil, the same harvests, yet turned into utterly different lives. A peasant's table is wooden, cracked, shared by family, huddled close. A knight's is a long trestle, spread with cloth, lined with retainers and guests. The food that fills them both begins in the same fields, but hierarchy decides its fate. Grain from peasant harvests becomes coarse bread for huts, fine white loaves for castles. Pigs fattened in the forest give lords their bacon slabs, peasants their ears and trotters. Fish from rivers is taxed away for noble ponds, while villagers make do with eels and dried herring. The difference is not only in what is eaten, but in who is allowed to taste first. Peasants live on monotony, bread and pottage, day after day, season after season. Ale that is more nourishment than pleasure. A rare egg, a shred of cheese, a cabbage boiled thin. When the harvest is good, the belly is steady. When the harvest fails, bark and acorns appear in bread, and famine turns huts into silent tombs. Hunger is always close, always watching. Knights live on spectacle. They may choose salted beef in winter like anyone else, but their banquets shine in memory. They roast swans redressed in feathers, serve pies stuffed with birds, pour wine into silver goblets. Their kitchens smell of cinnamon and pepper, their dishes glow golden with saffron. Even when the meat is tough, the spices announce wealth. Even when storage spoils flavour, servants redress it with sauces. A noble table is not meant to satisfy hunger. It is meant to proclaim superiority. And yet, for all their differences, knights and peasants share the same vulnerability. Both depend on the harvest, on salt, on barrels and smokehouses. A bad year empties peasant bellies first, but soon enough even noble kitchens scrape for variety. No amount of silk on the walls can conjure wheat from frozen fields. Hunger may visit huts more often, but it knows the way to castles too. The myth of medieval cuisine often imagines endless meat for nobles, endless gruel for peasants. The truth is subtler. Yes, peasants ate less meat, but they were not strangers to it. Slaughtering a pig in autumn filled cottages with sausages, hams and lard, rationed carefully. Villagers hunted rabbits, trapped birds, fished rivers when they dared. Their diet was not luxurious, but it was resourceful. Nobles, for all their access, did not eat fresh meat daily. Much of their diet was salted, dried, preserved like everyone else's. They indulged more often, but they too lived in a world without ice boxes or markets stocked year-round. The church shaped both tables. Peasants marked fast days by absence, nobles by substitution. When meat was banned, the poor tightened belts. The rich filled halls with eels and carp. Lent for a peasant was hunger. Lent for a noble was an excuse for elaborate fish dishes. Yet the calendar's grip was universal, reminding both that God dictated kitchens as much as fields. Status, however, never loosened. To eat coarse rye was to wear poverty on your tongue. To eat fine wheat was to parade wealth with every bite. To drink ale was to join the earthbound. To sip wine was to join the powerful. Even waste became a privilege. A noble who left trenches uneaten proved abundance. A peasant who licked the pot clean proved survival. What endured beyond the Middle Ages was not just the food, but the symbolism. Bread remained a metaphor for life itself. Daily bread prayed for in churches, daily bread counted by stewards, daily bread hoarded in times of war. Meat continued to mean privilege. Even centuries later, to put beef on the table was to mark yourself as wealthy. Spices became less rare, but their association with power lingered. The banquet as political theatre survived into modern courts, where food is still weapon and statement. The legacy of medieval cuisine is paradoxical. On one hand, it looks grim, monotony, hunger, rot, superstition. On the other, it forged habits that still live. Preservation methods, salting, smoking, fermenting, remain foundations. Communal ovens, communal brewing, communal feasting shaped social life. The divide between coarse and refined bread, between ale and wine, left echoes in cultural identity across Europe. And perhaps the truest legacy is the reminder that food is never just food. In the Middle Ages, it was survival for the poor, performance for the rich, morality for the church, and symbolism for all. To sit at a table was to declare your place in the world. To eat was to prove it again and again. So when we look back at nights gnawing gilded meat and peasants stirring smoky pots, we do not only see diets. We see hierarchy made edible. We see a world where hunger and abundance lived side by side, divided not by what the earth gave, but by who controlled it. We see a cuisine that shaped Europe's memory of itself. Humble, extravagant, always fragile, always meaningful. And if it tastes strange to us now, that is only because we live in a world where food is choice. For them, food was fate. Our next story will focus on what life is like, living in a medieval monastery. Make sure you're comfortable, because it will be an interesting one. A monastery in the Middle Ages is a wall around a promise and a sword against the world. It advertises peace, but the peace is not the world's absence, it is the world's renunciation. Before a man wears the habit, he must decide, or be decided for, what part of himself will be left outside the gate. He might be a younger son from a noble house, the sort whose inheritance has already been spoken for by an older brother and a primogeniture law. Land is finite, salvation infinite, and families with more boys than acres discover piety is cheaper than quarrelling. The boy has hunted, ridden, learned Latin enough to blush through a psalm, and then, one day, his mother smooths his hair and says gently that God will be his estate. He understands the arithmetic, even if he does not yet understand God. He might be a peasant's child with a hunger deeper than the winter. The monastery glimmers, not with gold, but with regular meals, stone walls, and the certainty that tomorrow looks very much like today. In a country where the weather and the Lord decide a man's fate, the bell offers a different master. The clock of prayer. A village priest or a travelling monk notices the boy's quickness with letters, the way he sings, the way he kneels without fidgeting, and suggests the cloister. Hope takes the form of a rulebook. He might be a man already weathered by sin and commerce, merchant, clerk, soldier, who has watched friends die, fortunes swing, and consciences fray. He comes later in life, perhaps widowed, perhaps weary, bringing a donation and a haunted look. He is told the monastery accepts him as a penitent. He nods, relieved to surrender his future to a schedule. He might even be a child oblate, offered by his parents in exchange for prayers, status, or sheer necessity. The church prefers consent. The world supplies exceptions. Oblation is dressed in piety, but woven from the same cloth as survival. Whoever he is, his first step is not holiness but threshold. He knocks. The porter opens a small door in a large one and studies him without hurry. If the monastery is Benedictine, the porter remembers the rule. The guest is Christ, but the gate is also a filter. The man waits in a small room with a crucifix and a bench designed for second thoughts. If he flees, no one pursues. If he stays, the abbot will test him. Questions, silences, a long look at his hands. Can he read? Can he work? Can he obey? The ritual of entry is simple and deliberate. His old clothes are taken, silk or sackcloth, it makes no difference. He is given a tunic that scratches and a rope that does not flatter. His hair is shorn in a tonsure. a circle of scalp bared at the crown, a baldness meant to imitate humility and to announce it loudly. The first time his scalp shines in sunlight, he feels both branded and freed. The barber's shears make no joke of it. The cut says, "Part of you has died." He does not become a monk at once. He becomes a novice, and the novitiate is a hinge between two lives. Some houses try him for weeks, others for a full year. The novice master takes him by the elbow and points at the new geography of salvation. The church, the cloister, the chapter house, the refectory, the dormitory, the workyard, the garden. Each stone has a purpose, each purpose has a time. The novice nods so often, his neck aches. The bell becomes his tyrant and his teacher. At matins it pulls him from sleep in the dark hours when even owls consider resting. He shuffles into the church with the other brothers, learning to find his stall without lighting a scandal with a candle. The Psalms begin, Latin not always understood, but always memorized, a river in which the tongue swims even when the mind lags. He stumbles on antiphons, watches the older monks' mouths, and lets the chant carry him until he can carry it. After the night office, there is silence so deep he hears the wood creak. He returns to his pallet in the dormitory. The brothers sleep in common in most houses, their beds arranged like quiet soldiers, and he steals a little more sleep before Lord's. Morning prayer brightens the windows, and his doubts at the same pace. If the house is Benedictine, prime follows. If Cluniac, the liturgy is longer and more splendid. If Cistercian, plainer and more severe. A man entering one house may be surprised by another's taste, but all agree on one point. Prayer is the day's spine. Work follows. Ora et labora is not a motto for banners. It is a bridle for restlessness. He goes to the garden with tools that will blister his hands, or to the kitchen where steam and soot consecrate vegetables, or to the bakehouse where loaves require the exact obedience that the rule demands, or to the infirmary where another novice explains gently that broth and kindness cure more ailments than flagellation. If he has letters, the scriptorium claims him, sharpened quill, scraped parchment, the patient illumination of someone else's wisdom. The novice learns that copying is prayer for the fingers. Humiliations test him softly at first and then with precision. He forgets to bow entering the church, and an older monk taps his shoulder afterward without words. He speaks at table when the rule demands silence, and the reader's voice pauses until he flushes and bows. He nods during psalms, his head heavy from the insistence of the bell, and the novice master lets him stand through the next office. Nothing breaks him, everything bends him. The monastery does not crush personality, it redirects it. The vow he will one day make has 3 clauses that are easy to name and hard to swallow: stability, conversion of life, obedience. Stability means he will not wander. His monastery is his country. Conversion of life means chastity, poverty, humility, fasting, and the lifelong renovation of habits that decay faster than bread. Obedience means the abbot's voice, acting for Christ's, will become his own desire, even when it isn't. A man can always obey when he agrees. The rule congratulates no one for that. The merit begins when he obeys disagreeably. He practices with small acts, arriving on the first bell, not the second, swallowing criticism without composing a clever defense. Bowing to someone he privately considers his lesser. The cloister is a school for a talent no court prizes, the talent for self-surrender. He writes or dictates a profession document that promises his life to this place, this abbot, this rule. If his family is noble, they endow the house with a gift as heavy as relief. If poor, they bring nothing but tears and a basket of bread for the porter. A mother hands her son one last token, a cloth, a wooden cross, a story, and then unhands him forever. The gate absorbs the sound of their parting. The porter, who has seen more of these than any man should, returns to his chair and thanks God without quite specifying why. Sometimes the novice flees. The world calls: wine, women, laughter, choice, and the wall that seemed holy yesterday looks merely high today. The rule anticipates this. If he returns, the abbot accepts him. If he lingers away, the house prays, the world eats him, and the bell forgets his name. More often, he stays. Habit breeds habit. The prayers wear grooves in him, and a man likes to fit where he has been worn. He learns the dress code of humility. The habit hangs plain, unadorned. The cowl, the great hooded cape, covers him in winter, in the choir, in the grave. He wears a rope belt that reminds him he has nothing to hang from it. The monastery takes from him not only property and prospects, but also self-presentation. Vanity, the rule says without saying, is a parasite that dies when starved of mirrors. He learns also that monasteries differ as men do. The black monks of Cluny will embroider the divine office until it rivals cathedrals. The white monks of Citeaux will strip it to bare stone and cold water. Augustinian canons balance the altar with the road, living among people more than apart from them. Carthusians will speak so rarely that speech itself begins to frighten them. But vows feel the same in every colour. Hunger feels the same, sleep feels the same when the bell interrupts it. He notices, with the guilty relief all men share, that monasteries are not perfectly holy. A brother snores, another hoards cheese, another glances too long at the lay sister who brings vegetables, another copies manuscripts with a laziness that makes saints blink. The abbot is patient, then firm. Penances are assigned: extra psalms, bread and water, public apology. Monastic life is not perfection, but practice, and practice is noisy. He accepts this as good news. If the holy struggle, perhaps he may struggle and still belong. On the morning of his profession, he lies prostrate in the church, dust on his face, arms outstretched in a cruciform that cramps his shoulders. The community chants psalm after psalm around him. Someone throws a funeral pall over his back. He breathes the smell of wool and incense and old dust and realizes that the symbolism is not subtle. He is being buried to the world. When he rises, he signs his vow chart on the altar, a parchment that will be kept forever in the house's chest, as legally binding as any deed. Brothers embrace him, one by one, quickly, without sentimentality, and the abbot gives him his cowl. He is a monk. The gate he entered as trial now locks behind him as life. Outside, the fields still depend on weather, the lords on the moods that passing fevers bake into them, the merchants on ships that sink too easily. Inside, the bell still rules, the rule still cuts, and the brothers still sing. He will not become a father in the world, but he will father lines of letters across parchment, rows of vegetables in gardens, habits in his own heart that, if examined someday by a God who sees better than abbots, might pass for holiness. He has left behind a name, a wife he never took, a son he will never hold, and a road he will never walk. The monastery gives him a different map: Matins to Compline, Advent to Pentecost, Lent to Easter, hunger to bread, pride to humility, noise to chant, death to resurrection in cycles small enough to fit in a day and large enough to fill a lifetime. He thought he came to escape the world. In truth, he came to learn how to die before he dies. The tonsure is only the first pruning. The garden has years to work. Life inside a medieval monastery is not a series of choices, but a choreography. Once the vows are taken, the monk no longer asks when he should wake, when he should eat, or when he should pray. The bell decides. The rule of Saint Benedict, or whichever variation governs the house, acts as clock, law, and conscience. The monk's days are not his own. They are hours carved into prayer and labour, a calendar split by feasts and fasts, a year paced by sowing and harvest, even within cloister walls. The day begins in darkness. Sometime after midnight, the bell tolls, dragging brothers from pallets in the dormitory. They shuffle, yawning, into the church for matins, the night office. The air is cold, the lamps dim, the Latin psalms long. Some monks fight sleep with pinched skin, others sway in rhythm, half praying, half dreaming. Yet the chanting carries on, a river of sound flowing through centuries. For the monk, time belongs to God, even the hours when the world sleeps. After matins, the brothers may return to rest briefly before Lauds, just before dawn. Then the church fills again, voices echoing against stone. As the sun rises, the monastery is already hours into its day. Prime follows, then terce, sext, nun, vespers, compline. 8 canonical hours in all, a relentless cycle that circles back upon itself. The bell never negotiates, never delays, never excuses. Whether sowing seeds or illuminating parchment, the monk stops at the sound. God first, always. Between prayers, there is work. The rule insists, ora et labora, pray and work. For the peasant monk, this means fields, vineyards, gardens. He digs, hoes, reaps, tends sheep, milks cows, turns soil. His body bends, his hands callous, his robe stains. For the literate monk, work means scriptorium, copying manuscripts, bending over parchment until his back knots, dipping quills into ink, scraping mistakes away with knives. Each letter is prayer in miniature. For others, duties lie in kitchen, infirmary, bakehouse, brewery, or as porter at the gate. The monastery is a small town enclosed in walls, and every monk is a cog in its economy. Silence is a law almost as strict as prayer. In refectory, during meals, no chatter is allowed. A reader recites scripture or hagiography from a lectern while the others eat, chewing quietly, ears forced to listen as mouths are filled. In cloister walks, monks may gesture, but rarely speak. Words are rationed like wine. Speech is permitted only in chapter house or under obedience. A careless joke, a casual conversation, is enough to earn correction. The monastery teaches, silence breeds humility, humility breeds holiness. Meals follow rhythm too. They are simple, even when the monastery is rich. Bread, pottage, beans, vegetables, sometimes cheese, fish on fast days, meat rarely, except for the sick. The calendar dictates lean days almost half the year. Lent turns tables austere, Advent pares them down again. A monk's belly is not meant for indulgence. Gluttony is sin, temperance a virtue rehearsed thrice daily. Seasons shape the rhythm more than clocks. In summer, fields demand more labour. Harvest consumes hands, daylight stretches long. In winter, fields sleep, and the scriptorium fills with men bent over manuscripts, breath steaming in the cold air. Festivals bring brief joy, Christmas with extra loaves, Easter with brighter hymns, harvest festivals with thanksgiving. But even festivals are structured by the bell. Discipline is everywhere. If a monk arrives late to chapel, he kneels outside in shame until admitted. If he speaks out of turn, he prostrates himself before the community. If he disobeys the abbot, penance may mean fasting, extra work, or in grave cases, excommunication. Correction is constant because obedience is the monastery's lifeblood. Yet the rhythm gives comfort too. Outside the walls, lords war, peasants riot, famine gnaws. Inside, the bell never fails, the psalms never cease, the bread appears daily, the rule remains unchanged. A monk trades freedom for certainty. His day is not his own, but at least it is ordered. In a world of chaos, order itself is salvation. And so, from matins to compline, from Advent to Pentecost, the daily rhythm turns. A monk ages, hair greys, hands stiffen, but the bell rings the same. He prays the same psalms he prayed as a novice, sits in the same stall, chews the same bread. Time is circular here, not linear. Eternity is rehearsed in repetition. In a medieval monastery, the table is as important as the altar, but not for indulgence. The rule of Saint Benedict devotes more lines to eating than to theology, because food is the first temptation and hunger the first teacher. A monk is supposed to eat to live, never live to eat. The kitchen is therefore a battlefield where body and soul wrestle at every meal. Meals are scheduled by the bell, like everything else. In summer, one meal at midday and a lighter one in the evening. In winter, only one. Fasting stretches across calendars. Advent, Lent, Fridays, Vigils, Ember Days. Nearly half the year, flesh of four-legged animals is forbidden. Monks are to abstain, not because meat is sinful, but because restraint is holy. Fish, however, is allowed, and monasteries become great engineers of ponds, rivers and trade to ensure eels, carp and salmon arrive in quantity. A normal meal for a monk consists of bread, vegetables, beans, sometimes cheese, sometimes eggs. Fish on fast days. Bread is baked daily in great ovens, loaves dark and heavy for ordinary brothers, lighter wheat for abbots and guests. Pottage, grains and vegetables boiled together, is the daily constant, steaming in bowls in the refectory. The fare is simple, filling, repetitive. Spices are rare, sweetness rarer still. Ale is the common drink. Brewing is a monastic art, both practical and charitable. Ale nourishes, disinfects, sustains. Some monasteries grow famous for their brewing, their recipes surviving into modern times. Wine appears in regions where vines thrive, sipped sparingly, more for sacrament than satisfaction. Water is drunk too, but suspicion lingers over its safety. The safest cup is the fermented one. Meals are taken in silence. The brothers file into the refectory, bow, sit in order of seniority. No chatter, no laughter. A reader stands at a lectern, reading scripture or lives of saints. The words flow while spoons scrape, reminding each monk that eating is not pleasure, but duty. If a brother is seen to enjoy his food too eagerly, he risks rebuke for gluttony. To sigh with satisfaction is dangerous. To ask for seconds, worse. Ideals of austerity, however, often bend under reality. Wealthy monasteries accumulate estates, rents, donations. Their kitchens swell with resources, their tables with abundance. Chronicles speak of abbots who feasted better than knights, cellars stocked with wine, kitchens with venison, swans, exotic spices. Reform movements, Cluniac, Cistercian, often arise to scold such indulgence, dragging monks back to barley bread and cabbage stews. But as centuries pass, the cycle repeats. Wealth grows, feasts return, reform follows. Visitors are treated differently. Hospitality is sacred, the guest is Christ. A noble arriving with retinue is served richer fare than brothers ever see. Roasted meats appear for guests, even during fasts, with dispensation. Monks look on, chewing cabbage, while nobles tear into venison. The contradiction is swallowed with the meal. Fasting itself is not uniform. Some monks, zealous, embrace extreme hunger, bread and water for weeks, hair shirts under robes, bodies thinned to shadows. Others, less holy, find loopholes. Fish is eaten in such quantity that the fast becomes feast. Eggs appear in disguise. Almond milk substitutes for dairy, and so much of it is used that abstinence looks suspiciously like indulgence. Critics write that monks sin by feasting on fish under the name of fasting. The church shrugs. Rules are kept, if not their spirit. Food becomes medicine too. Galenic theory teaches that balance of humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, depends on diet. Monastic infirmaries prescribe broth, herbs, controlled portions. The sick may eat meat when others cannot. Special diets are prepared for weak brothers, extra cheese, extra wine, even sweets. Illness provides exceptions. Asceticism is postponed when survival is at stake. For all the rules, monks never escape being human. Hunger gnaws, temptation whispers. Chronicles record brothers sneaking food, hoarding bits of cheese, even stealing from kitchens. Punishments follow, penance, fasting, public shame. The irony is sharp. Punished for eating, punished again for stealing to eat. The monastery preaches austerity, but practices compromise. Its food is plain, but not starvation. Disciplined, but not always harsh. A monk's body must endure labour, prayer, writing. Starve it too severely, and the voice falters, the hand shakes, the brother fails his duty. So kitchens sustain while pretending to deny. Thus, the monastery table becomes paradox, a place of denial and nourishment, discipline and weakness, holiness and hypocrisy. A monk eats daily bread, knowing Christ is the bread of life, chews cabbage knowing saints starved for God, drinks ale knowing indulgence is near. Every mouthful is theology disguised as stew. If the kitchen sustains the body, the scriptorium sustains the mind, and, as monks believe, the soul of Europe. A monastery is not only a house of prayer and work, it is also a library disguised as fortress. Behind thick walls, away from plagues and wars, knowledge is gathered, preserved, multiplied by hands that cramp, eyes that blur, and patience that cracks. The scriptorium is not glamorous. Imagine a long room, narrow windows letting in as little light as possible, benches lined with desks, and the air heavy with ink and silence. Candles burn, but not many. Wax is costly, tallow smoky. Monks squint, lean close, bend until spines ache. Silence is broken only by the scratch of quills and the occasional cough. The task seems simple. Copybooks. But in an age before printing, copying is survival. Without it, texts vanish, chewed by mice, rotted by damp, lost in war. The scriptorium is the reason Aristotle, Augustine, the Gospels, and Galen reach later centuries. Every word preserved is a victory against time. Every mistake is a potential heresy. The monk begins by preparing parchment, scraping animal skins until smooth, cutting them into leaves, pricking them with lines to guide writing. Ink is brewed from oak galls, vinegar, and iron salts, dark and lasting. Quills are cut from goose feathers, their nibs trimmed again and again as they wear. Before a word is written, hours of labour already lie in the page. Then comes the text. Some monks copy the Bible endlessly, psalm by psalm, letter by letter, convinced each stroke is prayer. Others copy commentaries, lives of saints, sermons, even pagan classics preserved, because knowledge is knowledge, though the church raises eyebrows. Each word is deliberate. To err is human, but to err in Scripture is dangerous. Errors are scraped away with knives, corrected in margins, sometimes left with prayers for forgiveness. Illumination is art and theology combined. Gold leaf is hammered thin and applied with delicate fingers, glowing like sunlight on the page. Colours are ground from minerals, plants, insects. Lapis lazuli for blue, vermilion for red, saffron for yellow. Margins bloom with vines, beasts, grotesques. A monk who paints dragons in holy books may be reprimanded, but secretly admired. Beauty, after all, is also prayer. The work is exhausting. Eyes strain, backs curve, hands cramp. Some monks fall asleep on desks, smudging fresh ink. Others ruin months of labour with a single spill. Jokes are scribbled in margins, complaints about cold, hunger, boredom. "Oh, my hand," one Irish monk writes, "it is weary with writing." Another notes, "As the harbour is welcome to the sailor, so is the end of the book to the scribe." They are human, even when cloaked in silence. Yet the monastery is Europe's memory palace. When libraries burn, when towns fall, when barbarians raid, manuscripts carried into cloisters survive. Monks do not invent new knowledge often, but they preserve old wisdom so others can rediscover it. Without their patient work, Aristotle might vanish, Cicero be forgotten, medicine and astronomy fall silent. They are custodians, not creators, but without custodians, nothing remains. Education grows from this. Some monasteries open schools, teaching boys Latin, scripture, basic arithmetic. Nobles send sons to learn, peasants rarely. Literacy is rare outside. Inside, it is common, though never easy. A monk may spend decades reading the same texts, memorizing psalms, chanting them until they carve grooves in the mind. Books are chained to lecterns, treasures more valuable than silver. The scriptorium is also politics. A monastery famous for its manuscripts earns prestige. Abbots boast of libraries, as others boast of vineyards. A gift of books is a weapon in diplomacy. Send a psalter to a king, a commentary to a bishop, an illuminated gospel to Rome. Knowledge travels as slowly as horses, but its weight is immense. Still, corruption seeps here too. Wealthy monasteries accumulate more books than they use. Monks copy for patrons more than for God. Abbots hoard libraries as symbols of power. Reformers complain. Monks spend more time bent over parchment than bent in prayer. But the work continues, because every abbot knows. A monastery without books is a body without memory. So day after day, year after year, monks scratch letters into skin, whisper prayers over lines, illuminate margins with beasts that never walk the earth. Their work is slow, unending, sometimes mocked, often forgotten. But centuries later, when printing presses roar and scholars quote ancient texts, the fingerprints of these silent armies of pens remain. The monastery is many things: kitchen, chapel, barn, hospital. But in the scriptorium, it becomes a time machine. Every copied line is a bridge from past to future, a refusal to let ignorance win. And in that silence where only quills move, Europe survives its own darkness. A monastery is supposed to be a place of retreat, but in the Middle Ages, retreat often looks suspiciously like conquest. Behind walls meant for silence, wealth piles up. Land is donated by nobles eager to ransom their souls. Peasants abound as tenants, barns overflow, and soon the cloister resembles less a hermitage and more a manor. The irony is not lost on critics. Men who vowed poverty preside over estates richer than villages, and abbots negotiate with kings while monks weed gardens. It begins with gifts. A noble donates a parcel of land for the salvation of his soul. The deed is sealed. The monastery now owns fields, woods, mills. Peasants who once paid rent to a knight now pay to the abbey. Each generation adds more. Families bury kin in abbey cemeteries, leave tithes, donate vineyards. Kings endow entire monasteries with rights to markets, tolls, fisheries. Before long, the house that vowed to renounce the world owns half of it. Abbeys become landlords. Stewards manage tenants, collect grain, oversee harvests. Monks supervise, though often indirectly. The work falls to hired lay brothers or peasants. Still, the monastery's barns fill, its granaries swell, its cellars overflow with ale and wine. Surplus is sold, coins pile in treasuries, abbots loan money to nobles. Monasteries grow into corporations before the word exists. Power follows wealth. Abbots sit in councils, attend parliaments, advise kings. Some wear mitres, indistinguishable from bishops. They sign treaties, mediate disputes, bless armies. When reformers complain that monks hide from the world, critics reply that abbots run it. Even cloisters of strict observance cannot resist entirely. Their prayers feed into politics whether they wish or not. Corruption seeps in. Monks meant to fast indulge. Abbeys meant to renounce grow fat on rents. Chronicles record abbots riding with retinues, their tables laden with delicacies forbidden to poorer brothers. Pilgrims complain of fees, peasants groan under abbey taxes. Reform movements rise again and again, Cluniac, Cistercian, Carthusian, each accusing the last generation of forgetting the rule. But reforms fade, and wealth creeps back like ivy on stone. Conflicts with bishops and lords are constant. Who controls churches on monastic land? Who appoints abbots, local nobles, kings, or Rome? Lawsuits multiply. Sometimes abbeys hire knights, raising small armies to defend estates. Monks are forbidden bloodshed, but mercenaries shed it for them. A cloister that once dreamed of silence now hears clashing swords in its orchards. Yet monasteries are also shields. During famine, abbeys distribute alms. During plague, infirmaries open doors. During wars, cloisters harbour refugees, sheltering villagers behind their thick walls. Generosity is remembered as long as rents are collected afterward. The balance is delicate. Too much greed, and reformers descend. Too much charity, and estates collapse. The abbot becomes prince in miniature. He wears plain robes but commands wealth equal to counts. His crozier is both shepherd's staff and landlord's baton. Within cloister walls, his word is law. Outside, his seal carries weight. Monks vow obedience, but sometimes they whisper dissent when abbots grow tyrannical. Chapter meetings bristle with tension. Should they correct the abbot? The rule allows it, but fear silences tongues. Politics intrudes at every turn. Kings call on monasteries for loans, popes for support, nobles for alliances. A monastery that displeases the wrong patron may find charters revoked, estates seized, abbots imprisoned. Cloisters cannot hide entirely. The world finds them, drags them into disputes, demands their grain, their prayers, their loyalty. Critics sharpen pens. Chroniclers complain. Monks eat better than peasants, abbots richer than lords, cloisters decadent while villagers starve. Satirists draw fat monks waddling with wine. Reform preachers thunder from pulpits. Return to poverty, return to prayer. Some monasteries listen, selling estates, tightening rules. Others nod politely and continue feasting. And yet, for all the corruption, monasteries stabilize kingdoms. They store grain in famine, administer justice on estates, sponsor bridges, mills, schools. Their wealth cushions shocks that would otherwise shatter villages. Their hypocrisy feeds anger. Their charity feeds bodies. Both are true, both are constant. So, a medieval monastery is not only a house of God, it is also a landlord, a bank, a political actor. Its abbots dine with kings, its monks copy treaties, its barns fund wars. Poverty is preached, wealth is practiced, reform is repeated. Behind stone walls, cloisters become kingdoms, and monks who swore to flee the world end up ruling it in quieter, subtler ways. When a monk lowers his head in the cloister, he does not imagine that centuries later, strangers will still argue about whether his life was wasted or preserved. He simply obeys the bell, chants the psalm, copies the book, tills the soil. Yet his obedience ripples outward, shaping Europe in ways he never measures. The monastery, more than the castle, more than the market, leaves footprints across the continent that remain visible even when the cloisters themselves crumble. The first legacy is survival. In ages when famine or war could erase a village overnight, the monastery endured. Its walls withstood raiders longer than cottages. Its barns held grain when fields outside failed. Its gardens bred herbs that soothed when plague carried others away. Villagers might grumble at abbey rents, but when hunger clawed, they lined at monastery gates for alms. In the memory of Europe, monasteries are paradox. Oppressors who taxed and landlords who saved, both hated and thanked. The second legacy is memory itself. Without monks bending over parchment, Europe might forget half of its past. Cicero, Aristotle, Augustine, Virgil, all survived because monks copied them. The medieval world added little philosophy of its own, but it preserved what otherwise would have burned. A brother in a cold scriptorium did not know he was handing Plato to the Renaissance. He only knew he was filling a page because the abbot said so. Yet history remembers the labour more kindly than the monk's own back did. The third legacy is rhythm. Bells divided the day, fasting divided the year, feasts united villages. Even those outside the walls absorbed monastic time. Markets formed near abbeys, pilgrimages targeted shrines, festivals aligned with church calendars. A farmer in a field, a merchant on a road, a noble in a hall. Each lived partly by rhythms, designed first for monks. The monastery's schedule became Europe's clock. The fourth legacy is corruption, and memory does not forgive easily. Satirists from Chaucer onward mocked fat monks, greedy abbots, lazy brothers. Reformers thundered against monasteries' wealth. Luther eventually condemned them as useless relics. The dissolution of monasteries in England under Henry VIII is remembered less for theology than for treasure. Gold stripped, land seized, monks pensioned off, or left wandering. Centuries of resentment caught flame quickly once kings saw profit in their ruins. Yet even in ruin, influence lingered. Many abbey churches became cathedrals or parish churches. Abbey lands became foundations of estates. Monastic brewing and farming techniques lived on in villages. Roads once maintained for pilgrims stayed open. The stones of cloisters were repurposed for manor houses, but the memory of chanting brothers haunted the walls. The fifth legacy is education. Abbey schools trained boys in Latin, in scripture, sometimes even in the rudiments of philosophy or medicine. Noble sons gained literacy, peasant prodigies sometimes slipped through the gates. Universities themselves were seeded by monastic traditions. Lecture, disputation, commentary, all honed first in cloisters. A medieval monk might not imagine Oxford or Paris, but his routine of reading and reciting was their ancestor. The sixth legacy is contradiction. Monasteries promised poverty but amassed wealth, promised humility but displayed grandeur, promised silence but whispered in politics. They were refugees of holiness and nests of corruption, libraries and landlords, almsgivers and tax collectors. Europe remembers them with suspicion and nostalgia both, unable to decide whether they were anchors of faith or anchors of hypocrisy. The truth, of course, is both. Walk today through ruins of a cloister, arches open to sky, cloister walks filled with grass, a church half standing. The silence is different from the medieval silence. Then, silence was discipline, the sound of obedience. Now, silence is absence, the echo of voices gone. Yet even ruins speak. They remind visitors that Europe once organized itself not by markets or parliaments, but by bells and psalms, by men who chose, or were forced, to bury themselves alive for God. And so the memory of monastic life endures in paradox. Critics recall fat abbots drinking wine while peasants starved. Admirers recall monks sheltering the poor, preserving learning, structuring time. Historians cannot erase either picture. The cloister remains in memory a place where Europe both lost and saved itself. This is the final irony. The monk who spent 40 years chanting the same psalms might believe his voice vanished into stone. Instead, the echoes shaped continents. His hunger during Lent, his silence in refectory, his cramped hand copying Cicero, these became Europe's foundations. The monastery's greatest legacy is not perfection, but persistence. Through centuries of war, plague, famine, and reform, the bell rang. Monks rose, prayed, worked, ate, fasted, slept, rose again. They endured, and by enduring, they imprinted Europe with their rhythm. Even when kings seized cloisters and reformers mocked them, the rhythm had already soaked into culture. The silence still hums beneath Europe's noise.